Is Mr. Loophole right that all cyclists should be insured and wear helmets and fluorescent clothing? The high-profile lawyer, otherwise known as Mr. Loophole, Nick Freeman, he's urging the government to force cyclists to be insured and to be required to wear helmets and high-visibility clothing. His call follows the news that the television presenter Dan Walker has said wearing a helmet saved his life in a bike crash in Sheffield. Mr. Walker was hit by a car while he was cycling on Monday, leaving him battered and bruised. I'm sure you've seen the photos. The Channel 5 presenter, who used to work on BBC Breakfast, was taken to hospital and was amazed not to have broken any bones. He tweeted, "The helmet I was wearing saved my life today, so if you're on a bike, get one on your head." Well, the lawyer, Mr. Loophole, has said that cyclists are incredibly vulnerable and wearing helmets and high-visibility clothing should be made mandatory. He believes, in addition, there are a number of cyclists who seem to totally disregard the highway code and ignore signals and junctions at their own peril. Motorists, of course, are easily identified by their registration plates, but cyclists are relatively anonymous, he said. Well, the latest figures show that in 2021, 111 pedal cyclists were killed in Great Britain. More than 4,300 cyclists were reported to be seriously injured, and almost 12,000 were slightly injured. So my question to you this morning, I'm very interested to hear how you feel about this, whether you're a cyclist, a driver, an occasional cyclist, or maybe just an observer with an opinion. Do you think Mr. Loophole is right that all cyclists should be insured, wear helmets, and wear fluorescent clothing? Here's the number for your call. If you want to get involved, have your say. 08081 008800. That's 08081 008800. Text me. 81333. Start your text with 3CR. Texts are charged at standard network rate. You can email me here at the BBC, jvsshow@bbc.co.uk, and you can WhatsApp me with your thoughts. 08000 321 333 to start your message with 3CR. Is Mr. Loophole right that all cyclists should be insured and wear helmets and fluorescent clothing?
The JVS Show.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Nick Freeman, otherwise known as Mr. Loophole, joins us now. Hello, Nick. Good morning.
Morning, Jonathan.
Morning. So why do you feel cyclists should be insured, wear helmets and fluorescent clothing? Why is it so important?
Well, you've just announced some statistics which are truly shocking. The cyclists are so vulnerable. They're exposed to massive dangers on the road from other motorists, from the road surface itself, and it just seems to be common sense to say you need to wear these items to protect yourself. And I've been talking about this for a long time, and to me, what's astonishing to me is why anyone's astonished that anyone would suggest this, because we get into a car which is a massive metal and you're protected, and you have to wear a seatbelt because it makes you safer. It stops you basically flying through a window or flying into the driver or passenger if you're sitting in the back. How can you possibly get onto a bicycle with that degree of vulnerability and say, I don't really want to protect my head and I'm not that bothered about being seen? What sort of mindset enables you to adopt that thought process? And if you have that thought process, is it right that society, the NHS or whoever should pick the bill up? Or should we actually say, as a society, we want to make the roads safer for everyone? And this isn't just about cyclists. And I appreciate we're talking about protective clothing, that motorists have to play a role as well. But while we're talking about cyclists, it just seems to be simple common sense. Do what you can to protect yourself by wearing these items. And if you're not going to, then I'm sorry, we're not going to give you a choice. It's going to be a mandatory requirement because it will, as Dan Walker very happily said, it saved his life. And what a tragedy. Irrespective of blame, we all make mistakes when we're cycling, we make mistakes when we're driving. But if those mistakes could be fatal and that could be avoided by simply wearing something, then surely as a society we have no choice. We have to adopt that and say this is what's going to now happen. And that's the argument in simplicity. There are, of course, other arguments that I would suggest would help. That's, for example, bringing in law that actually makes cyclists exposed to the same degree of legal culpability as motorists. We've got a legal system for cyclists which is archaic. It's absolutely ridiculous. For example, you may not be aware of this, Jonathan, you probably are, there's no speed limit for cyclists. There's actually not a drink drive limit or a drug drive limit. There's an offence of driving whilst unfit. And when a cyclist tragically kills a pedestrian, and those statistics are on the rise in terms of injuries for pedestrians, not fatalities but injuries. I'm not sure about the fatalities. We're relying on a law, the 1861 Offences Against the Persons Act. The maximum sentence is 2 years. So if you have a cyclist, and occasionally there are some, who cycle dangerously, they kill someone, their maximum sentence is 2 years under 1861 legislation. So what I'm saying is, look, this is about making a safer space for everybody, not just cyclists, motorists, cyclists, pedestrians, everyone. And we all need to collaborate, move together as a society and say, what can we do in our respective role? Sure, I know people will say, well, if you're in a car, you're the one who's always responsible because you're protected. And certainly motorists have to take more care, and the new highway code helps that, and motorists need to adhere to that religiously. But at the same time, you can't have cyclists jumping red lights, cycling recklessly, dangerously, without due care and attention, and not having proper penalties in place, and not having a means of tracking them. And I would say that they always need to be identifiable by having either a number plate or a registered tabard. That's something that needs to be discussed, so that every cyclist, like a motorist, at any time is accountable for what they've done. You've not just got an action of someone going, say, through a red light or knocking someone down on the pavement and they're off. If a car does it, you have a means of tracking the driver. As a cyclist, you don't. So basically, I'm saying we need to just look at the whole situation again, wipe the slate clean and start all over to make the roads safer for everyone.
The counter-argument, though, that I have seen from cyclists is that by doing all of this, you're putting the pressure on the cyclist. And actually, it's more simple than that. Car drivers just need to pay more attention. You know, they need to look where they're going. They need to recognise that there might be a cyclist on the road. That cyclist might be wearing Hi-Vis clothing. They might be wearing a black jacket. Either way, it's the motorist who should be looking where they're going because they are the ones with the car with the headlights.
I think any society which says, I have no responsibility, is a society which needs to look deep into itself and think, actually, I'm wrong. Because the truth is, we all have some responsibility in varying degrees. And if you're out at night time in your car and a cyclist dressed in black goes across the front of you with defective lights, no high-vis jacket, nothing to identify him in terms of his presence, and you tragically hit him, yes, of course, ideally your headlights could have picked him up, but in that split second they didn't because it was so difficult. Do we want to be arguing about who's at fault, or do we want to be having a discussion about what would make the road safer? And if someone says, if the cyclist...
Oh, Nick, are you there?
Then they're clearly wrong, and I can't believe that is their best argument.
What age would you like to see your suggestion, come about? I mean, for example, do you also feel that children should wear high-vis jackets, helmets, and should children also be insured on bikes?
Well, I don't think children should be allowed on the roads unaccompanied by someone who I would actually make anyone who cycles on the road pass some sort of proficiency test. And at the moment there is a test. It's not called the proficiency test, but I would make them do that to make sure they're familiar with the highway code. And certainly children under 14 or 16, open to discussion, shouldn't be allowed to cycle on the roads without somebody who is properly supervised.
What about kids, though, who cycle to school? I mean, I remember myself from time to time when I was, 12 or 13, going to secondary school, I would cycle.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's, I'm afraid, a very different world. Particularly since COVID, we've seen an explosion of the number of bicycles on the road. And it simply isn't safe. And I'm not sure whether a responsible parent, and I appreciate all the eco-friendly arguments and credentials and saying it's good for children to cycle to school. If there were dedicated cycle lanes that were protected and segregated, absolutely. That's a different proposition. But our infrastructure is woefully inadequate. Obviously, there needs to be a huge investment by the government. But I've cycled on the roads. I cycle on the roads. I've been to London to cycle with the vigilante cyclists. And it is so dangerous to say to a child, yes, you get on your bike, have a nice day at school, you'll be all right. I think it's irresponsible for a parent to say that.
But it's dangerous because of car drivers, isn't it?
it is dangerous because of car drivers to some extent, but you cannot expect car drivers to drive with perfection all the time. The reality is car drivers are going to make mistakes, as are cyclists. And of course, a cyclist is always going to come off worst. And that's why I'm suggesting measures that will help protect them, because they can't be trusted to adopt these measures themselves. So, just going back to the seatbelt argument, why do motorists, surrounded by all that metal, airbags, etc., why do we have to wear seatbelts? We're in a protected, safe environment. No, the government say, we don't want you going through the windscreen for obvious reasons. Why aren't the government interposing their views here and saying, we need to make it safe for cyclists? Because some cyclists, they wear them. If you said to Dan Walker now, you interviewed him, what's his views going to be about a change in the legislation, allowing motorists, allowing cyclists to have a discretion as to where they wear a helmet or not? I'm quite sure that he would say, this saved my life. And I shouldn't have that choice. We don't have that luxury in society.
It was interesting, though, wasn't it, that he wasn't wearing Hi-Vis clothing. I've seen the video, and he's dressed all in black. Do you think that accident would have been less likely to occur had he been wearing fluorescent clothing?
I've only seen stills of the accident, and what I've noticed is several things. One, he was dressed what I would say is inappropriately, okay? Secondly, the motorist was far too close to the car. And I'm not apportioning blame because I haven't seen continuity, I've seen stills. Thirdly, there is a route under this horrendously dangerous roundabout junction which would have avoided the entire situation, which Dan Walker decided, for reasons that I'm not familiar with, he didn't want to take. So there was a conspiracy of events that contributed to what could have been a horrendous accident, which fortunately, thank goodness, turned out to be a really bad scare, but not as bad as it could have been. So yes, he wore the helmet, that saved his life. Had he been wearing Hi-Vis, I suspect that the motorist saw him, and I don't know why the motorist got so close or didn't brake. I don't know. I haven't spoke to Dan Walker, I haven't spoke to the motorist, but I think they're all contributory factors. And what they indicate is it's not a case of intelligence in this argument. It's a case of someone just saying, look, the statistics are shocking. Most cyclists are really vulnerable. We do need to try and help them protect themselves against themselves because they're not prepared on occasions to do it themselves.
Okay.
And whilst we're doing that, we need to also make them responsible for the way they cycle.
Just one final quick question. There will be many people listening to the programme who will accept the arguments for the helmet, they'll accept the arguments for the fluorescent clothing, but they may well argue that if you make it mandatory that cyclists have to be insured to ride their bike, that will put some people off bothering. And if they can't be bothered to arrange the insurance for their bike, if they don't want to have to pay for that insurance, then they may decide to get behind the wheel of their car and drive instead. And every car that we can get off the road environmentally is a good thing and should be, encouraged. Is it not a potential concern that it would persuade would-be cyclists to just stick with their car?
I agree it's a potential concern, but if they're concerned about the environment as they purport to be, they would not allow the fact that they need insurance to block their cause for saving the planet, which we all need to get involved with. So it isn't really a strong argument because it's suggesting actually I only care for the planet to some extent, but not really the full extent because, damn it, I've got to take insurance. So when you look at a pedestrian who's walking along, a lady walking along with her young kids, and then mown down by a cyclist, and this happens increasingly, and if you look at the statistics, those statistics are on the rise. Is it right that that poor lady has no recourse because it may be that person is impecunious, doesn't have the funds, isn't going to be able to afford to pay thousands and thousands of pounds for life-changing injuries, damages? Is that right? Or does it make sense to say, actually, we need to have insurance to protect victims such as pedestrians who are even more vulnerable than cyclists?
Okay. Always good talking to you, Nick. Thank you so much for your time. Nick Freeman is the lawyer known as Mr. Loophole, who argues, as you've just heard, very passionately that cyclists should be insured, they should wear helmets, and they should have to wear fluorescent clothing by law. He feels the government needs to step in and make this a law. Do you agree with him or not? 080